The passing of Nasser in September 1970 sparked expectations for a peace agreement with his successor, Anwar Sadat. While Sadat persisted in demanding Israeli withdrawal from all occupied territories, Meir proposed a partial retreat from the eastern bank of the Suez Canal. Even though Sadat found the counteroffer unacceptable, Meir outlined a plan that would allow Israel to retain the Golan Heights, Jerusalem, and the Egyptian port of Sharm el-Sheikh, situated at the southern end of the Sinai, while Israeli forces would withdraw from the remainder of the peninsula. These proposals led Menahem Begin to initiate a vote of no confidence against her, which she narrowly overcame. Meir's strategies for the West Bank and the Gaza Strip lacked clarity, but she was willing to relinquish these lands to the Arabs, preferably to Jordan, as she believed Israel's security was best maintained with a Jewish majority state rather than absorbing more than 1 million Arabs from the occupied regions. Reluctant to disturb the fragile political equilibrium within the nation before the Arabs were serious about negotiations, Meir upheld the status quo, allowing Dayan and the Ministry of Defense to manage the West Bank. Dayan supported the unconventional idea of establishing a permanent Israeli military presence in the West Bank while permitting the Arab regions to be governed by Jordan. Despite opposition from most of his government peers, Dayan anticipated that coexistence would foster peace and began to execute his vision, constructing Jewish settlements in the West Bank and promoting the flow of goods and people between Israel and Jordan. Even though the Jordanians participated in the 1967 conflict alongside the Egyptians, they remained Israel's closest ally among the Arab nations. Israelis acknowledged that King Hussein faced significant pressure to exhibit pan-Arab unity from compatriots and his own Palestinian constituents. Hussein also wanted to escape the fate of his grandfather, King Abdullah, whom Meir had encountered just before Israeli independence and who was assassinated by a Palestinian in 1951. On September 6, 1970, Palestinian Fedayeen seized 4 commercial aircraft and landed them at Dawson's Field, a Jordanian airbase, demanding the release of Fedayeen prisoners. After freeing most of the hostages, the Palestinians retained the Jewish prisoners and destroyed the vacant aircraft on September 12. Jordan plunged into civil war on September 17, when Hussein commanded loyal troops to subdue the Fedayeen in his capital of Amman, prompting Syrian intervention in support of the Palestinians. Upon receiving a cry for assistance from Hussein, Meir instructed the Israeli Air Force to fly over the Syrian troops as a show of strength, which combined with a successful Jordanian counteroffensive, halted the Syrian advance. Days before his death, Nasser facilitated a tentative peace agreement between Jordan and Palestine. As the impasse in the Middle East persisted, numerous entities offered to mediate a peace agreement, including a delegation of African leaders. Meir had lost faith in any significant peace with the Arabs, a sentiment that was reinforced on the morning of September 5, 1972, when the Palestinian Fedayeen group Black September abducted 11 Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympics. With 2 Israelis already dead, the Fedayeen threatened to execute the rest unless Israel released more than 200 Arab prisoners. The incident marked the most recent in a series of terrorist assaults against Israeli targets authorized by Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. When the Fedayeen declined to accept a ransom payment from the West German authorities, German police initiated a failed rescue operation, which led to the deaths of all the Israelis, 1 German police officer and 5 Fedayeen. In response, on September 15 Meir authorized Mossad to carry out an operation to track down the Fedayeen responsible for Munich. When Meir faced criticism for denying the Palestinians their right to their own nation, she refused to recognize the existence of a distinct Palestinian nation and contended that Palestinian Arabs were free to reside in any of the Arab nations in the Middle East. In May 1973, after 4 years at the helm of the country, Meir declared her intention to step down from the premiership in October. Her approval ratings remained over 70%, the economy was experiencing rapid growth, and Israel was receiving substantial military assistance from the US government, which made her feel increasingly secure. While Meir shifted her focus from defense to social policy, In August, the Syrians set up Soviet anti-aircraft batteries opposite the Golan Heights. On September 25, King Hussein covertly visited Israel to alert them of a looming Syrian attack backed by Egypt. Despite Israeli intelligence reports indicating that Egyptian troops were moving towards the Suez Canal, Dayan believed the Egyptians would not have the courage to confront the Israeli military. On October 5, the Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Force, General David Elazar, suspected that hostilities were on the horizon, but the Israeli leadership refrained from full-scale mobilization. On the morning of October 6, the day of Yom Kippur, the most significant holiday on the Jewish religious calendar, Meir met with Elazar and Dayan. Although she opted against launching a pre-emptive airstrike that could threaten American diplomatic support, she consented to full mobilization over Dayan's objections. The invasion commenced that afternoon, but the Israeli leadership was confident that they would replicate their earlier successes against the Arabs. They were taken aback to receive reports of Egyptians conducting coordinated attacks on Israeli targets along the canal in the south, while Syrian tanks advanced towards the Golan Heights. The Israeli air dominance that had secured the Six-Day War was undermined by the Egyptian and Syrian anti-aircraft defenses. While a frantic Dayan suggested relinquishing the Golan for a more defensible position, Elazar remained hopeful that he could withstand the enemy assaults long enough to mobilize his reserves. When a disheartened Dayan supplied his resignation, Meir refused, but she took private charge of the war effort, developing plans for a counteroffensive alongside her senior officials. As the Israeli reserves took to the field, the tide of war began to turn at the cost of heavy casualties. By the third day of the war, the Syrians were falling back in the north, while Elazar's costly counterattack in the south halted the Egyptian advance. After recapturing the Golan Heights, Meir authorized the Israeli Defense Force to advance on the Syrian capital of Damascus on October 11. On October 14, Israeli tanks defeated an Egyptian assault in the Sinai, allowing Israeli troops to cross the canal on the 15th. When the Soviets and Americans proposed a ceasefire and direct negotiations between Egypt and Israel, Meir was initially inclined to reject the terms, as the Israeli Defense Force was poised to surround and eliminate the Egyptian Third Army in the Sinai. After learning that Sadat had accepted the proposals, Meir met U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to finalize the details of a ceasefire on October 22. After an Egyptian attempt to break out of the encirclement, fighting resumed until a second ceasefire was agreed upon on October 25, with the Egyptian Third Army completely trapped. While the Israelis had managed to pull off a victory, 2,600 soldiers had perished in the process, and instead of celebrating, the Israeli people blamed the initial setbacks on Meir and Dayan. Though she accepted her responsibility for the debacle, Meir traveled to the United States to discuss peace proposals with Kissinger and President Nixon. In late-night discussions with Kissinger, Meir adamantly refused to break the encirclement of the Third Army without a prisoner exchange. In the meantime, on October 28, Egyptian and Israeli military officials made substantial progress in negotiating a prisoner exchange, the resupply of the Egyptian Third Army, the gradual withdrawal of troops from both sides, and the reopening of the Suez Canal. The agreement was finalized when Kissinger visited the Middle East the following week. As a result of the war, the Knesset elections scheduled for October 31 were postponed to December 31. Despite her previous commitment to resign, Meir hoped to keep the Labour Party united while denying power to Begin's Likud party. While Dayan had been blamed for the failure to prepare for the war, Meir kept her defense minister in his post, causing her own popularity to decline. On December 21, Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban attended the Middle East Peace Conference in Geneva alongside the Jordanian and Egyptian delegations, but the meeting lasted one day without being reconvened. When voters went to the polls on December 31, Meir's Labour Party won 40% of the vote against 29% for Likud. While Labour remained the largest party, Meir was disappointed to have lost support. As she tried to form a new government, Meir realized that whether she retained Dayan or sacked him, a faction of the Labour Party would refuse to back the government. On April 11, she resigned as party leader, throwing her support behind Yitzhak Rabin, who narrowly emerged as the party's choice. Meir retained the premiership until she was able to secure a disengagement agreement with Syria, brokered by Kissinger on May 31. On June 3, she left the Prime Minister's office and was succeeded by Rabin. At the age of 76, Golda Meir was a legend in her own lifetime. When her ghost-written autobiography was published in 1975, it became a global bestseller. On November 14, 1977, Meir attended the opening of Golda, a Broadway play by William Gibson. Days later, she returned to Israel to meet Anwar Sadat, who was visiting Israel after declaring his willingness to make peace. When Meir asked the Egyptian president why he could not have met her several years earlier, Sadat responded that the time was not right. Earlier in the year, Menahem Begin had become prime minister after defeating Labour in the Knesset elections in May. Meir was disheartened that the conservative Begin, who appointed the rehabilitated Dayan as his foreign minister, was taking the credit for making peace. In September 1978, Begin, Sadat, and U.S. President Jimmy Carter negotiated the Camp David Accords, paving the way for Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories. While Begin and Sadat were in Oslo to receive the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize, Golda Meir died of lymphoma at the age of 80 on December 8, 1978. Golda Meir had lived an extraordinary life spanning 3 continents. After being born into poverty in the Russian Empire with the threat of pogroms hanging over her, she spent her childhood in the United States, where she became a passionate believer in the labor Zionist movement. After struggling to balance her life ambitions with her parents' demands, she prevailed upon her reluctant husband to move to Palestine, anticipating the establishment of a Jewish nation following the Balfour Declaration. After a challenging first decade in the kibbutz and struggling to make ends meet in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, Meir began her slow climb up the ranks of Jewish political leadership, becoming an indispensable advocate for the Zionist movement in the United States, neglecting her children and leaving her husband in the process. After working tirelessly to support European Jews under Nazi occupation in the 1930s and 40s, Meir emerged as the right-hand woman of David Ben-Gurion, the father of the Nation of Israel, founded in 1948. What are your opinions on Golda Meir? Was she a powerful leader who proved to the world that women could confront men on the global political arena and secured the ongoing existence of the State of Israel? Or did she overlook several chances to establish peace with the Arabs due to her inflexibility and rigidity? Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful and inspiring. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what topics you'd like to see next.